Hey everyone, Mr. Evans here with your pre-recorded live lesson for Unit 6, Lesson 7, Environmental Change.
So we've gone over some of this stuff piecemeal in a couple of previous lessons, but we're going to try and tie a few things together about how the environment affects species. It really does all come back to that. The environment does not care if it is good for a species or bad for a species. The environment has no consciousness, no caring, no compassion, nothing. It just is. It's just a natural function that just happens. So whether it kills off a species or makes it thrive, there's no consideration there. It just happens. So it is therefore up to the species that live in that environment to either adapt or go extinct. It's not fun, it's not nice, but that's nature, man. Nature don't care. You got to adapt to nature or you're going the way of the dinosaur, quite literally, as we will see. That is true for all species. It's true for species in the ocean, species on the land. If a species cannot react to environmental change, it will go extinct. A lot of times, if it happens really, really fast, there is absolutely no way that a species can change. An individual can't just, adapt instantaneously in response to the environment. That's not how it works. It takes a long time, it takes many generations, lots of little tiny mutations that lead up to an ability to thrive in a changing environment. There have been several mass extinctions over the course of the Earth's history, over the billions of years that the Earth's been around, where the environment changed so quickly that most of the species just could not adapt. The environment just went from awesome on Monday to a dystopian nightmare for them on Thursday. And there was no way they could adapt fast enough, so they just went extinct. The best known example of that is the dinosaurs. And, most of you probably have at least heard that around 65 million years ago, there was an asteroid impact in the near the Gulf of Mexico, more specifically the Yucatan region of Mexico. And this was a very, very large asteroid. And when it hit the Earth, it threw up a wall of fire and dust that went all around the Earth, and it lowered the global temperature by several degrees, and it blocked out the sunlight, and all the plants died. And like all this happened within the span of like a week. The asteroid hits, boom, everything in the area, like for 1,000 miles around, boom, just dead immediately. Fire killed it off. Boom, there's some species right there that just went extinct. These all died in the firestorm. But then when the dust went all up around the world, circled the globe, blocked out the sunlight, dimmed it, dropped the temperature, all the plants died. Anything that depended on the plants to eat died. Anything that ate the stuff that ate the plants died. So that was the mass extinction of the dinosaurs. When the plants died, all the brontosauruses died, and then the Tyrannosaurus rexes died because they didn't have any meat to eat. It just happened too quickly. It was too fast. There was no time to change. Now that's a rare event, and it's like the most extreme event. Most environmental change happens more slowly. For example, when the ice ages come and go, that happens more slowly. So in a lot of cases, there is time for species to move to a different environment or to slowly acquire mutations and adaptations that allow them to persist in the changed environment, but not always. And that is a process. That's a process that sometimes it does happen, depending on the severity of the environmental change and the speed, and sometimes it doesn't. But those actions not only lead to the an increase in fitness to a species that can survive the change, it actually can result in new species diverging off from the original over many generations. Maybe they adapt to that change differently. Maybe in some events, like let's say that there's a climate change that is putting um, that is turning something into, a drier region. Maybe one group of a species, maybe one part of the species adapts to that slowly over generations by finding better ways to get water. But maybe another group of the same species, they get some mutations that allow them to conserve water better. And both of those strategies work. And if those individuals in that species can get separated out because one is like over here going looking for more water and the other one's just chilling conserving the water they already have, over many, many generations, that population could split and start to diverge into separate species. But, that all sounds nice and easy and neat in theory, but what, actually happens? So there are many ways that can happen. Sometimes it's mostly one, sometimes it's a combination of a few things, but let's just kind of hit some of the key words here and talk about what's actually going on. So let's just take something, for example, like a population of squirrels. There's some squirrels living in the American Northwest, and they're all the same species of squirrels. But then there's some kind of event. Maybe a river changes course, maybe a freeway gets put in and constructed, maybe a migratory path changes. Something happens geographically, like there's some kind of physical barrier that comes up relatively quickly that splits the whole squirrel population like in half. Like there's one half on the east side and there's one half on the west side. And for whatever reason, they just aren't interacting as much. That's called geographic isolation. It's where like the squirrels just can't get to each other anymore. But they're still the same species like at that moment, but something has just kind of divided them and they just can't interact with each other anymore. Well, one half of the squirrels are going to go off to the east, the other half's going to go off to the west. Maybe the food sources are different. Maybe there's different types of predators on either side of the freeway. The migratory paths change. They can't forage for food in the same way. Well, in effect, those two squirrels are now going into slightly different environments because they just aren't interacting with each other. And if they're not breeding with each other anymore, then their gene frequencies of the traits in their genes are going to start to drift. The squirrels on the west bank are going to start developing and adapting traits over many generations that are good to survive on the west bank. And the squirrels on the east bank are going to do the same. They're going to start adapting and generating new traits and new alleles over many generations that are good for the east bank. After enough time, what originally was one squirrel population can start to look very different. Maybe their coloration changes because there's different plants on either side of the river, different trees with different colored leaves and bark, and they have to blend in differently. Maybe there's predators on one side, but not on the other. So the squirrels on the side with the predators have to be a little faster and a little more crafty. And the squirrels on the side with no predators can get a little bigger because they don't have to worry about running away as much. So that's just a couple of examples. It could be anything. But if the environment changes or they're forced into one side or the other, they're going to adapt to that environment. After a long enough time, their genetics can actually diverge enough so that they are considered now two separate species of squirrel. And if you let 1,000,000 years go by or whatever, and you go back and you check on those squirrels, maybe one is now a gray squirrel and the other one is a white spotted squirrel. And you could put those two squirrels together and they won't mate. They won't breed. They can't breed. They are now two separate species of squirrel. Maybe they still could. Maybe not. You'd have to get some, it would depend on how far apart they had diverged. So that's geographic isolation. So habitat isolation is similar to geographic isolation, except it's more of a choice of the species. Now, animals don't necessarily make active choices the same way humans do. But it is more of the same thing in terms of just moving to different geographical areas. And this is more of like a voluntary thing because for whatever reason, maybe they already have traits or behaviors or whatever that draw them towards a certain habitat. So they just like go there on their own. Maybe they were like migrating and they came across an area or a new territory that worked for them. It worked well. Tons of food, water, whatever. So they just stayed. They chose to stay there because it worked and it was easier to survive. Maybe their physical characteristics they already had made that a better area for them. So that's habitat isolation, where the animal population just kind of chooses to migrate over here. The example given in the lesson are lions and tigers. I mean, lions and tigers, they're pretty similar. They're big cats, claws. They're clearly different species, but they are similar. Lions and tigers did descend from a common ancestor, some kind of large cat, maybe something like a saber-toothed tiger. That's just an example. I don't know if that's it. That's just kind of an example, but some ancestral form of large cat is the common ancestor of both lions and tigers. Well, lions live on the African savanna, by and large. Tigers are from Asia, more jungle-like areas, more tropical areas with more vegetation and stuff. So lions, they chose a habitat where they're like chilling on the savanna and they're not trying to hide. They're not really trying to be too sneaky. They're blending in with the grasslands. So that habitat works for them. Lions will just chill right next to the herd of gazelles, chilling, just resting, and then they'll just pop up and decide it's time to go grab one. They just slowly follow after them and just pick one off when they're hungry. And that worked for them. That habitat worked for them. Tigers, on the other hand, are like more stealthy. They'll like try to hide up behind the trees and they'll pounce on their prey. So for whatever reason, a long time ago, from this ancestral cat, this common ancestor they have, some of them decided to go the route of the savanna. Some of them decided to go the route of the jungle. This was a habitat isolation where there wasn't any one event that forced them to split. They just kind of drifted apart on their own because it worked for them. Similar to geographical isolation, a little bit different. All right, behavioral isolation. This one is a little bit more weird, but it is very common among birds and insects. So a lot of birds, and just about all birds, have like really complex mating rituals. The males have to sing, and you can start hearing them sing right now. I mean, anytime you hear a bird singing, that's basically a male bird looking for a date. So, and outside your bedroom window, you hear male birds like yelling at each other, trying to scare each other off, trying to attract females. It's like a whole bird soap opera going on outside your window. But those mating calls are a behavioral trait of the birds. So is the coloration of their feathers. Some birds have to do like really weird, complex dances, and they make like shapes on the ground with sticks to attract a female. These birds put out some work to make it known that they got some game. But anyways, that's a behavioral isolation. And if these things, like how they actually develop and happen, takes a long time to study. I mean, for whatever reason, when this was just starting out, the male bird did something that the female liked. Like maybe making this weird shape with the sticks on the ground is saying, hey, babe, I can build a nest. I'm really good at building nests. You should choose me. Maybe. I don't know. Maybe the dance, maybe the dance means they're physically fit. But after a long time, like the original reason why they started doing it doesn't even matter anymore. It's just something that has to be done. Because the female birds have kind of adapted to look for that. Meaning if that guy can do that stuff, then he'll be a good mate. I don't know. I'm not a bird. But anyways, this is a behavioral isolation where there's not necessarily anything separating them from anything physical, from like keeping them from being a certain species at the beginning, but their behaviors start to isolate them. Maybe they just start hanging around a new food source because they like that food better or it's easier for them to get. Maybe a small group likes the water a little bit better. They think hanging out by the water is beneficial, and they're more inclined to look for food around the water. But some kind of behavior begins to separate the individuals, and then that gulf widens over time to where there's like no particular physical or genetic reason at the beginning for them to start to diverge, but the behaviors just kind of make them drift apart, the individuals of a species. And then after a long time, they have totally different behaviors, they look different, and they are different species. That one's a little bit more complex. It's not as straightforward to like understand. There are bird experts who like spend their whole careers trying to track what went down. Like these birds right here, like they have blue feet and blue beaks, and they do this crazy mating dance. You want to look up some funny stuff, like look up bird mating dances. There are some that go completely crazy. It's weird, but it is interesting. The last one is temporal isolation. This one is pretty easy to understand. You just have individuals that choose to mate at different times of the year. Like certain animals have breeding seasons where they either breed in the spring or they breed in the fall. Most animals don't have winter as like a mating season because the winter stinks for animals because it's like can't find food and stuff. But spring, fall, those are kind of like mating seasons. And if one group of individuals doesn't have the same mating season as another, then they're not going to mate because one individual just isn't interested. It's not time. It's not the right time of the year. Go away. So that is temporal isolation, where for whatever reason, this group over here has chosen spring as the mating season, and that group over there has chosen fall as the mating season. That one is pretty easy to understand. And the last one here is mechanical isolation. It uses flowers, like here as an example. Mechanical isolation means the body structure, the actual shape of the body, has just kind of stopped working to even let mating be possible. Now, the lesson here uses flowers, saying that like sometimes the anthers and the pollen, the shape of the pollen grain, like won't fit into another flower, so the flower can't create a seed. But like I like to use the example of dogs. Like think of a Chihuahua and a Great Dane. Okay, now if you could technically cross a Chihuahua and a Great Dane with some artificial assistance. Now, hopefully the Great Dane is the mother, because the other way around, she probably wouldn't survive. But a Chihuahua and a Great Dane are never going to breed on their own for like obvious reasons. I'm not going to go into too much detail there, but you can imagine this. It just mechanically is just not going to work. They're just too different physically to make it happen. Now, their DNA is compatible. If you had a lab and you made puppy embryos in the lab and then you put those embryos into the mother, which again would have to be the Great Dane. If the mother was the Chihuahua, she would not survive the pregnancy, or it would not implant. She would like miscarry because, yeah. But those are all like mechanical differences, where like the shape, the physiology, the size, it just isn't going to happen. That is mechanical isolation. That can also happen Once a species diverges enough for like some other reason, mechanical isolation could come into play, where their bodies are just too different to allow mating at all. And the result of like all these, whether it's geographical, temporal, mechanical, habitat isolation, when you finally get to this last step, gametic isolation, that is like the point where they are like officially classified as different species, because when you try to bring the sperm and the egg together, they're just too different. They just won't form an embryo. They are no longer genetically compatible. Like if you took a dog sperm and a cat egg and you put them in a dish and you tried to get them to fertilize, it's not going to happen. They're too different. They're two different species. There is a point where enough change has happened to reach this, where they're just not genetically compatible anymore. It's a slow process, and like when it first starts to happen, you're going to see like a percentage drop as these two species kind of diverge and start to become different species. You're going to see drops in the chances of a successful fertilization event. Like, here's an example. You can cross a horse and a donkey. You can breed a horse and a donkey. The result is a mule. A mule is sterile. A mule cannot have children of its own. A mule cannot reproduce with another mule. But if a horse and a donkey are bred, you get a mule. Now, the horse and the donkey are kind of genetically compatible because they do create an offspring, but that offspring is not viable. So that's an example of horses and donkeys. They are drifting apart in terms of their species. They're not like totally 100% diverged yet, but they are getting there. And eventually, after many more generations, you won't even be able to make a mule anymore because the embryo just won't form. The same thing is with like certain species of dogs, like think like jackals and hyenas with common household dogs. It is still possible to breed those two species, but the chances are very low, and a lot of times the offspring is not viable. So it's a percentage chance of success with increasing problems as the species get further and further apart, until a point where like the probability of cross working is just like so low that it's like zero. All right, so those are the different types of isolation that lead to new species creating over time. This is how speciation happens, where you had one species originally, and then some events happen, some mutations happen, environment changes, behaviors change, and over long periods of time, you have the species literally diverge and become new species. These are the main mechanisms as to how this happens.